And then you will get a definition of what it means. Ushers, you may be seated. And so I want to look at this particular passage of scripture. This verse in this particular passage of scripture is known to us because it is the first time the word tithe is mentioned in the Bible. It's also in this particular passage the first time the word Hebrew is mentioned in the Bible. And Hebrew is an ethnic group of people whose founder is Abraham, in the sense that God designated him as the father of a nation, the father of the select group of people that God has chosen to use. But I want to look at this man, Abraham. When you look at the life of Abraham in this particular passage of scripture, you're going to see Abraham's journey. When you look at Abraham's journey, you're going to see how Abraham decides to honor God. He honors God in such a way that it is notable. It's mentioned that he honors God by giving to God. And I really wanted to look at this because it is important that we consider what Abraham does and why he does what he does when it comes to giving. And let me explain this to you, my brothers and sisters. Giving is about honoring God. Yeah. If you don't understand giving from a position of honoring God because of what God has done, what God is doing, and what God will do. We've already discovered ownership, that everything that we have, it belongs to God. We discussed that because we wanted to establish that if you own any material thing, God gave it to you. God owns it. And then we moved from there. We talked about God did it. If you have any success in your life, if you've achieved anything, if you become anything, if you will become anything, it is because God is going to do it and God did it. Yeah. Any of us have to sit back and recognize that if we are where we are, have what we have, done what we have done, God did it. And I wanted to establish that because that's important for you to understand. Now, when you look at this story about Abraham, what he did in the 14th chapter, around 18 through 20, you're going to see Abraham honoring God for what God had just previously done. You got to understand his name is not Abraham at this time. His name is Abram. And that is significant because it is God's going to eventually tell him to leave his father's house and go out from his father's house and go to a place or a land that he shall show him. But in this time where God is preparing Abram for a time, a place, and for a destiny, Abram is on his adventure to serve God and to honor God and to follow God's leading. God is going to lead him to some places. Now, it's interesting where you read this particular text, you've got to go back to chapter 13 because chapter 13 is really going to explain some things to us. He's going to explain to us at the end of chapter 12 how Abram got his wealth. Now, I really wanted to deal with Abram because the number one figure, Dodie, that people use, especially in the prosperity gospel about wealth, health, and prosperity, they use Abraham. And they say that we can claim the promises of Abraham because I can admit to you, Abraham was a wealthy man. He was very wealthy. But I want to talk and look today at the end of chapter 12. We're going to see how Abram got his wealth. Now, most of the prosperity gospel tells you that God wants to bless you, God wants to prosper you, God wants to give you money. But I'm going to explain to you how Abraham got wealthy, how Abraham accumulated all that he had. And when you look at the end of chapter 12, starting around verse number 10 of chapter 12, you're going to discover how he accumulated his wealth. And it's going to be very obvious to you when you get around verse 16 to see how he got his wealth. He's going to become a very wealthy man overnight in Egypt, but eventually he's going to travel down to Canaan. He's going to end up in Canaan, but he did not start out there in Canaan and become wealthy, but before he ever got to Canaan, he was wealthy. And the story of how he got wealthy is interesting. You know, they were in Egypt. They were in Egypt, and let me tell you, what he discovered when he was in Egypt, that Pharaoh thought that his wife was real fine. He thought that Sarai was fine, was a good-looking woman. Read the story, you're going to discover it, that he thought that she was fine. And he wanted her to be a part of his harem. Because of Abram was afraid that if Pharaoh knew that he would probably kill him. And so he concocted this story for Sarai to tell Pharaoh that she was his sister, so that he could marry her or make her a part of his harem. You're going to see that in the text if you just read it, because this Egyptian Pharaoh thought that she was very, very, very beautiful. And Abram was trying to protect his life. He says, listen, make sure you don't tell him that you are my wife, but let's pretend like you're my sister. And because Pharaoh thought that she was beautiful and thought that she was going to be a part of his harem, he treated, according to verse 16, Abram very well for her sake. In other words, he used his wife and said that she was his sister so that he could get some material possessions, what you're going to see in the text. And Pharaoh did gift him with a whole lot of wealth. Look what the text says. He gave him, or he gifted him with these sheep, oxen, and donkeys, female and male servants, and female and male donkeys and camels. All of this was gifted to him. He earned his wealth there in Egypt because of the Pharaoh. But let me tell you, this lie cost Pharaoh a great plague in his house, because he wanted Sarai, Abraham's wife. God caused this plague to come to his house. And then Pharaoh got a little upset with Abram, and he kicked him out of the country. And I'm telling you, I'm just trying to give you the story of how he gained his wealth. Down there in Egypt is how he got rich and wealthy, because Pharaoh gifted him all of this stuff because he wanted to really, in a sense, pay a dowry to Abram because of his sister, but his sister was really his wife. In other words, he got his wealth through trickery. He didn't get it from God, he got it by lying. He was gifted all of this wealth. And we're going to get to chapter 13, and you're going to see in verse 2 of chapter 13, as a result of being gifted these agricultural animals, all of this livestock, it says in verse 2 that Abram was very rich in livestock, silver and gold. And I'm trying to explain to you how he got his wealth. He got his wealth because of the lie he told to Pharaoh and the possessions that Pharaoh gave him. And I can tell you, I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole of explaining to you Mesopotamian culture and how it was Abram's culture in which he thrived in. It was that civilization in that time period in antiquity. They are the one who learned how to herd animals, crossbreed animals, and how to herd animals and increase the value of animals and this commodity of trading animals. And so in this particular time, how you knew a man was wealthy was by how much livestock he had. How he could trade it and raise it and crossbreed it and to increase the number of offspring. And by chapter 13, we see that Abram had become a very rich man in livestock, and silver, and in gold. And how did he get the silver and gold? By trading livestock, by becoming a businessman. And boy, I'm trying to explain to you that whatever the prosperity gospel tells you, that listen, Abram was an industrial man. He was a working man. He was an innovative man. He was an entrepreneur. All I'm trying to tell you, that if you want to get rich, go to work. Yeah. Quit trying to believe that all you can get your wealth is from the Lord by sowing seeds, giving it to a prophet and apostle. But let me tell you, Abram got his wealth by being a very wise entrepreneur, by going out and going to work, investing his money, coming up with a business that he could scale. That's how he got his wealth. I'm trying to explain to you something. If you work hard, you can become rich. If you invest wisely, you can become financially stable. And you don't get mad at people who work hard, retire, save their money, invest, and are very thrifty, and they amass a great amount of wealth. And let me tell you, they got it because they were wise steward of what God gave them. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I'm trying to explain to you how Abram became a wealthy man. And we haven't seen yet, Sister Combs, that Abraham sowed a seed and God gave him wealth. We hadn't seen one time where Abraham was asking God for anything. I'm telling you, he got what he got from Pharaoh. He took what he got from Pharaoh. He invested it. He scaled it. And the text says he turned tangible assets into monetary wealth. And how they measured wealth was by how much gold and silver you had. Are you still with me? Yeah. Now, I know this is very technical, but I'm really trying to explain to you that his wealth did come from God. Yeah. But it was through his hard work, through his investment, through his innovation, that he became wealthy. Yeah. And what I am trying to do, intentionally, Steen, is to put holes in the prosperity gospel. Yeah. You know, the prosperity gospel, in my assessment, is a pyramid scheme. The only people that get rich is the people at the top. But listen, Abraham did not use a pyramid scheme in order to get rich. He did not try to extort people. He did not try to promise people that God would do something for them if they did something for him. Abraham worked hard. He invested, and he scaled his wealth by his own hard work. And the text says in verse 2 of chapter 13 that Abram became very, you know what very rich is. See, some of us got a little money, but I'm looking at some folk who are very rich. Yeah. Very rich means you got more than what you need, and you got discretionary and primary income. And when I go get a car, I got to make sure I can get what I can afford. You get to get what you want. Yeah. You can put a label on the kind of car you get. That's the difference between being wealthy and very wealthy. Very wealthy literally means that you can pick the side of town you want to live on, and the size house you want to live in, and the designer clothes you want to wear, and it still doesn't hurt your bottom line. It's the difference between having a little money and being very wealthy. And let me tell you, I'm just trying to explain to you. And then Abram and his nephew Lot decided that they were going to take their herds and they were going to go down from Egypt down to the land of promise, or down into near Jerusalem. And when they got down there, according to verse 5, and really I'm just trying to explain to you before I get to verses 18 and 19 of chapter 4, I'm trying to explain to you that listen, he was very wealthy, but Lot was very wealthy too. Yeah. And by verse 5, let me tell you, they got into it. Because let me tell you, when you get a lot of stuff will cause a lot of mess. Yeah. Because that's what happened in verse number 5. Because what you're going to discover is that Abram was wealthy, Lot was wealthy, and because both of them had a whole lot of stuff, both of them settled in the same place. But guess what? When they settled in the same place, because they had a lot of stuff, a lot of servants, the land couldn't sustain both of them. Yeah. And so conflict arose. And the herdsmen of Abram got into it with the herdsmen of Lot. And you do know having a lot of stuff can cause a lot of conflict. And I'm just trying to explain to you the text. Because you got to be careful, because stuff can cause mess. Stuff can cause division between people. Sometimes, and I really wish some of y'all would get this, because you don't understand, with having a lot comes a lot of responsibility. You know the reason why some of us are not blessed the way others are blessed is because you couldn't handle it. And let me tell you, you get what you can handle. I can't wait till I get to the part in the New Testament where Jesus talks about one who was given 5 talents, one who was given 2 talents, and one who was given 1 talent. And he gave them talents based on their ability and the responsibility to scale what he gave them. The reason why you don't have much is because you can't handle much. And you can't expect to get much when you can't and you won't do nothing with the little that you got. Now you want God to believe that you will give him more if he gives you more, and he gives you something and you don't give nothing. And you want God to believe that if he gives you more, you're going to give him more. And when you get a little, you don't give him nothing. That don't make sense. And that's what Jesus teaches when he says the 5 talents, the 2 talents, and the 1 talent. You're going to be blessed according to your ability, and God knows what you will do with what he gives you. Now let me go back to this particular text, because I want to explain to you that there was a conflict between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen. There was a conflict because the land couldn't sustain both of them. It just couldn't, because of the servants of Abram, the servants of Lot, and their livestock and all that they had. The land couldn't sustain both of them. And so the herdsmen got into it. Now I need to explain to you, Abram and Lot didn't get into it. Their herdsmen got into it because they were the ones out there working in the fields. And this conflict, because of this conflict, there was almost some division between nephew and uncle. But Abraham, being the more gracious one, he decided to resolve the conflict. And let me tell you, this conflict was over stuff. This conflict was over land. This conflict was because both of them had a lot. You know that most conflicts in most of black families, the black community, and black church is over money. I don't even understand it. Why people always fussing over money. Conflicts that we have in the church, in the community, in our families, and among us is always about money. And I would really give you this advice if I could give it to you and you could take it and not get upset. The only person money you need to be worried about is the money in your pocket that's got your name on that account at the bank. Anybody else's money, it really ain't none of your business. What they do with their money, how they spend their money, ain't got nothing to do with, do I have any witnesses in here? But money can cause so much conflict, material things and stuff. But Abraham decided, nephew, I'm not going to let this conflict over this stuff and this land cause a division among us. And let me tell you, Abraham gives us an absolute excellent way to dissolve conflict when it comes to stuff that tries to divide us. Abram is going to tell Lot, listen, there is Jordan and there is Canaan. There is the right, there is the left, there is the east or the west. You pick where you want to go. And whatever you don't pick, that's where I'm going. That's simply the way he resolved the conflict. But you know what? We don't ever resolve conflict when it comes to stuff. When it comes to money, we'll fight and we'll burn the whole house down if we don't get our, do I have any witnesses in here? We'll burn the whole house down. And listen, just because we can't get our way over stuff, material possessions and stuff. Listen, Abram realized that the relationship between him and his nephew was more important than stuff, than land, than a place. That's how you resolve conflict. Abram said to him, if you go to the right, I go to the left. If you go east, I go west. And what he did, he gave Lot the chance to choose first. And what Lot did, he looked over at the land of Canaan, which was probably undeveloped, was more rural. And then he looked over toward Jordan. It was more urbanized, and it was more settled, and it was more people. And there was an urban population. There was a metropolitan city. And Lot says, I'm going to Jordan. And Abram said, okay, that's fine. I'm going to Canaan. But where Lot went was in Sodom and Gomorrah, this bustling city of commerce, this bustling city of a nightlife, this bustling city where all of this commerce and all of this commercial and nightlife existed. Lot said, I'm going to choose the better. It was this place where there were rolling rivers and hills. There was vegetation for all of this livestock. Lot chose to go toward Jordan. And Abram went to Canaan. And so the conflict was averted. They settled the conflict. They were not willing to suffer or to injure their relationship over something that could be resolved by somebody being the bigger person. I'm telling you, isn't that a great lesson to learn? Is do you have to be right all the time? Do you have to win all the time? Do you have to always stake your claim? Sometimes the blessing is in letting somebody else choose first. Sometimes the blessing is in letting somebody else win, because God is going to bless you no matter what somebody else chooses that you might want. Because what we're going to discover, Dora, is because Abraham let him pick first, Abram ended up picking the better place. You got to be careful, because some folks think they win, but in the end, well, I wish I had time to really explain this to you. Don't get upset because people think they have won, that they've outdone you, outmaneuvered you, outsmarted you. Because let me tell you, you can never outsmart God. Abram already understood that God had made a promise. God was going to take care of him. God was going to provide for him. And it didn't make any difference where he went. He probably, I don't know, that song that says, blessed in the city, blessed in the country. When you know you blessed wherever you go, it don't make no difference where you go. Do I have any witnesses in here? And see, Abram understood it don't make no difference where I go. The Lord is with me, and the Lord can bless me wherever I Boy, I'm just trying to really explain this to you, that Abram was a very rich man, and this conflict arose because verse 6 said the land was not able to support both of them, and that they might dwell there together because their possessions were so great. One commentator wanted me to tell you to notice verse number 7, because in that land there existed the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and they dwelled there in the land. And these two tribes saw Abraham and Lot, and they probably heard of this conflict that they had between one another. And one commentator wanted me to explain to you that the Canaanites and the Perizzites represent the secular world, and Abram and Lot represents the church world or believers. And what they wanted me to explain to you, Pastor, is that the way these two church men settled their conflict, it had a good impression on those who were outside the church. And that's a good lesson for us to learn. First of all, we shouldn't take church business out to unchurched folk. And so they allowed this conflict, and that's why he believes the author put these two groups that were already in the land, because these two men, Lot and Abram, represented godly men who believed in Jehovah, and they were able to resolve their conflict, and it didn't get out. And the world didn't see them divided, but they were able to resolve their conflicts equitably, and it set a good example to those who were unchurched. And I'm telling you, if the world could see church folk getting along better, resolving conflict, and not let church business leak out in the community, it would be a better example to those who want to come to church. And most people don't come to church because they see how church folk behave. Because how messy church people can do and be. And so Abram and Lot were able to settle this conflict among these unchurched folk. Now I'm about to get to verse chapter 14, because I'm just trying to explain to you. Lot thought that he chose the best part of the land. Verse 10 says he lifted his eyes toward the plains of Jordan. He saw that it was well watered. And this was before God, according to the text, destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like a garden of the Lord. It was a beautiful land. And so Lot went there. He chose it for himself, the plain of Jordan. I'm trying to explain to you. And so they separated from each other. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan. I'm just trying to explain to you. He pitched his tent there, and it wasn't as lush. It wasn't as developed. It wasn't all that Jordan was, but he let Lot choose the choice land. But let me tell you, I'm trying to get to chapter 14, because I'm going to explain to you that eventually in chapter 14, conflict broke out where Lot chose near Jordan. And boy, I tell you, chapter 14, when I was trying to study this particular text, Clyde, what I discovered is there were some names in there that I can't pronounce. And I done listened over and over and over again. The only name that I really can pronounce fluidly is Melchizedek. That's the only one in there. But there's a whole lot of kings. And really, let me explain it to you, because I can't pronounce all the names that are in there, because a lot of kings and a lot of tribes and a lot of creatures are going to be described in verse 14. But let me give you an overview of what happens before I get to my text. There were 5 kings and there were 4 kings in the territory where Lot settled. And there was a conflict about paying taxes. And let me tell you, there was a king who was collecting taxes from these groups or these kingdoms or these groups of people, and they felt like they were being overtaxed, and they felt like the taxes were being oppressive upon them, and they wanted to get from under the oppression of this heavy taxation. And so they rebelled against this particular king in this text in chapter 14. And this king decided, okay, you're going to rebel? Listen, I'm not putting up with rebellion. I'm going to start a war, and I'm going to crush you. And that's exactly what he did. He crushed those who rebelled against him, and it caused a conflict. And among this conflict was the king of Sodom. You remember, Sodom is where Lot lived, in Jordan, in this particular place that was conquered by this king who wanted to crush a rebellion of his citizens, of his kingdom, and the surrounding kingdoms that didn't want to pay him taxation, did not want to pay him his taxes. And so he went in and invaded these cities. And when he got to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, he went in there and he conquered the city. But not only did he loot the city and take all of their gold, their silver, all that was in the city, he also kidnapped Lot. He kidnapped Lot. I'm trying to explain to you. This king went in and he was able to overtake the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, along with these 4 other cities and all the cities. And he plundered them, looted them, got all of their wealth, all of the material possessions, all things of value. And in the process of doing that, he kidnapped Lot. But let me tell you, God always got somebody to rescue you when you get in trouble. And that's why it's very important Sister Steen, to make sure that you realize that sometimes when you might need folk. You got to be careful how you treat folk. And sometimes when you do what you do, you never know when you might need them later on down the line. Because it was that conflict, and if the conflict wouldn't have been solved right between Abram and Lot, now Lot gets in trouble. And the only person that can get him out of trouble is Abram. I'm trying to explain to you this particular text because you really got to be able to see this. And when this king was able to conquer Sodom and Gomorrah, he ended up pillaging the city. He ended up pillaging the city, and he took all and everything. He went in there and just took it all and kidnapped. He kidnapped Lot, and that's in verse 12 of chapter 14. And they also took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelled in Sodom, and his goods, and they departed. Let me tell you, I'm trying to explain to you. But then one who escaped went and told Abraham the Hebrew. The first time the word Hebrew is mentioned in the text. And they went and told Abraham. Now when Abraham heard that his brother's son had been taken, he gathered an army of 318 trained servants who were born in his house to pursue as far as Dan. He divided his forces by night against them and attacked them, pursued them. And guess what? So he brought back all the goods, and he brought back his brother's son, Lot, and his goods. It was Abram who got Lot out of trouble. Lot didn't get in trouble intentionally, but this king went in and conquered the city of Sodom, and here comes Abraham to the rescue. And I want you to notice that when God blesses you, God blesses you in everything that you do. He blessed him in Canaan. And now with only 318 men that's born in his household, he goes and defeats a king that has defeated 4 cities, plundered the cities, and brought those cities to ruin. But Abraham, well-trained men, only 318 was able to defeat this king, take back everything that he took, give it back to every king, and also rescue his nephew and get his stuff back. I know y'all bored, but I'm just trying to explain to you the story. This is the context of the story. I'm trying to explain to you why Abram honors God with his possessions. Because first of all, God allowed him to leave Egypt a wealthy man. He allowed him to leave Egypt, and when he settled in the Middle East, he was able to become very rich. Now Abram is going to display his military strength with only 118 men, and he divided 118 men, and they attacked, and they were able to rescue and to recover all that was lost at the hand of this king who wanted to wage war. And so in verse 17, the king of Sodom went out to meet him. And after he had defeated this king, and he wanted to meet Abram, and then as he was going out to meet him, we get to verse 18. Abraham, and then the king of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest of the Most High, and he blessed him, and he said, "Blessed be Abram of the God of Most High, possessor of heaven and earth." And he blessed the Most High, and the God has delivered your enemies into your hands. And then he gave a tithe of all of everything that he had. I really need to slow down and explain to you what happens here. And I don't want to get into who King Melchizedek was. Many believe that he was an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ, because it says that he was a priest and a king. He was the king of Salem. Salem is ancient Jerusalem or modern day Jerusalem. And he brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest of the Most High. And if he was a priest, he was over the house of God. But if you read in the book of Hebrews that Melchizedek is described as not having a mother and a father. He has no beginning and no end. And that's the reason why many scholars believe that it is an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ. And so what Abram essentially did, if he was a literal king, he gave to this particular king a tenth of everything that he had. And he honored him by submitting to him, by trusting that God had given him the victory, God had blessed him, and now he wants to honor God. Now, I don't want to get too caught up in the tithe or the tenth, because listen, you ought to bless God based on how God has prospered you. Now listen, I'm not going to set a figure, but you know what God has done for you. I've already told you he owns everything, and anything that's happened to you that was good, God did. Abraham made a voluntary choice to honor God with a tenth of everything that he had. And I already told you in the previous verse, in verse 2 of chapter 13, that Abram was very wealthy. Now let me tell you, the wealth that he had, the gold, the silver, and all the livestock he had, he parsed out a tenth and gave it to the king Melchizedek, and he gave it to the Lord. Because what the king said was, Abraham, you are a blessed man. Abraham, the Lord has delivered you. And if you are blessed by God, and if God has given you any victory in any matter against anybody, you ought to be willing to give to God. Do I have any witnesses in here? I mean, has God not been good to you? Has God not given you some victories? Have God not opened some doors shut in your face? Have God not made ways out of no way? And King Melchizedek recognized that God had blessed Abram. God had delivered him, delivered his enemies into his hand. And he says, listen, you are a blessed man. And in response to what this king said, Abram gave a tithe of everything. Now, I really need to stop because I'm almost finished. I got about 8 minutes, but let me explain this to you. He wasn't asked to give. He wasn't coerced to give. He wasn't compelled to give. And he didn't give under duress, but he gave voluntarily. Matter of fact, the king didn't ask for anything. Melchizedek didn't ask for anything. He wasn't obligated to give, but he felt like God had given him everything. God had done everything, and he didn't have to be prodded and convinced and literally manipulated to give. He gave because he looked at the goodness of the Lord. I mean, you take inventory and look at just how good God has been to you. How God has blessed you. And let me set aside for just a minute any material thing God has done for you. Did he wake you up this morning? Did he start you on your way? Did you have a reasonable portion of your health and strength? Do you still have your right mind? Did you able to get up and get in your car, drive down the highway? Did you have an accident? Were you able to walk in this church? Are you sitting under the sound of my voice? Then baby, you blessed. Better than blessed. I mean, I'm blessed. More than blessed. And I'm telling you, the Lord has shown off. Delivered some of my enemies into my hand. And the word into my hands, Destiny literally means under my feet. Because see, sometimes God will put your enemies under your feet so your enemies can be a footstool. And sometimes God will prepare a table before you in the presence of your enemies. Your enemies try to do some stuff, but God will bless you right so so your enemies can see you being blessed. And if the Lord has done anything for you, you ought to be willingly and just happy to give something to God. I'm trying to explain to you, and I'm finished. I'm almost finished, but Abram decided to give voluntarily to honor God. Now, really, by him giving, you know what he was saying? He was saying, God, I trust you. God, I honor you. And God, I submit to the fact that you gave me the victory that I just won. I trust you, God. And so I honor you, God, because I submit to the fact that if I just won, you won it for me. With 118 men against a trained army that had victory after victory, and you put me in this situation for the purpose of getting my nephew, you gave me the victory, so I don't have a problem giving. And I need to stick a pin right here, Karen, because you got to understand this too. If you don't give because of what God does for you, you ought to give for what God does for somebody else that you love. I wish I had time to shout in here, because some of us know that the Lord been good to our children. You can call them children, kids, your babies, whatever. You know the Lord been good to some of y'all children. He done kept them alive, got them a good job, brought them through dangers, seen and unseen, let them graduate college. Ain't God good? And God was good to Lot. And I don't know why Abraham gave specifically. We can suggest a whole lot of things. But I know one thing, he got who he loved out of trouble, out of danger, and not only that, he got his stuff back. And so wouldn't that be a reason to give, because you see what God has allowed you to do in the lives of other people, and God has blessed you to help folks. That's right. That's right. Ain't God all right? And then let me close, because verses 21 through the rest of chapter 14 is an interesting story. I mean, it is an interesting story because Abraham knows who has blessed him and that it was God behind any blessings that he had. Because now the king of Salem is going to try to give Abraham some stuff that he got back for the king of Sodom. In other words, if it wasn't for Abraham, the king of Sodom wouldn't have gotten back any of his possessions. He wouldn't have been able to claim victory, but he was able to claim victory because of what Abraham and his 318 men did. And so Abraham was able to go in and reclaim the city of Sodom, but then he took back the stuff that was taken by the king who took it in the first place and gave it back to the king. Now what the king wanted to do, he wanted to give Abraham some of the stuff that Abraham got back. Yeah. But Abraham says, I ain't taking it. That's what he says in verse 23. I will take nothing. Not a thread, nor a sandal. He said, I ain't taking nothing. I will not take anything of yours. Lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. Well, I'm telling you, when you let folk do stuff for you, they think it's them that's done it. But Abram says, I ain't going to let you give me something, because you're going to start taking the credit for where I am, for what I got, and which I know that the Lord has done. And so even though he was responsible for helping him get his kingdom back, get his stuff back, he says, you ain't giving me nothing. I'm not taking anything from you, because if I do, you're going to start talking about how wealthy you made me. And Abram said, it's the Lord who's been blessing me. And I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters, you got to have that perspective. And you got to be careful what you let people do for you, because they start thinking that they are the reason why you blessed. No, baby, I'm blessed because the Lord been blessing me. Do I have any witnesses in here? You got to know that it is God. It might be through your employer, but it is. How many of y'all know where your blessings come from? And your blessings might come through your employer, but they come from God. Maybe say, I ain't taking nothing, even though I'm the reason why you got back everything you got back. He said, but what I do want you to do, I want you to take care of the men who fought to get you back what you got. Because it's only fair and it's only right that you make sure they're taken care of, but I don't need anything. He said, if you want to give somebody something, give something to somebody who is responsible for you getting back what you got. Except only to the young men who have eaten and who were with me. Abraham was concerned about those who were with him. They helped him to fight and helped the king reclaim what he lost. And he said, now, take care of them. Boy, that's some good stuff in here. I'm just trying to teach you this morning because, see, Abram didn't want anything, but he wanted to make sure those who were responsible for the king getting back what he lost, make sure they are taken care of. Boy, if we had that kind of concept in the black community, in the black church, if we wouldn't be so mad when folk got what they got from the church or through the church. But see, we don't want nobody to have nothing because we think that our giving is the give all, tell all, and if we stop giving that the church going to starve to death. You know God always got a ram in the bush. God is always going to take care of his own house. He is the house of bread. That's what the word Bethel means, is where Abraham went and built an altar and sacrificed to the Lord. It's called the house of bread. God gonna take care of his. You can't starve out the church. God gonna take care of his. All right. You keep your money in your pocket. Don't ever give. Right. This church ain't gonna never go without. And neither am I. Abraham said, I don't need nothing you want to give me. You can give it to the men who deserve it. And there are some people who deserve it. And you ought to be happy and cheerfully giving to them. Not begrudging. Muzzle not the ox that treads out the corn. I say, I don't want your stuff. You keep that. Because unless you say, I made you. Well, I tell you, folk will do that to you. If you buy a new suit, they think they money done it. You buy a new car, they think they money bought it because they give in the church. Do I have any witnesses in here? But let me tell you something. I'm going to get what I get whether you give a dime. Because you don't know what I got going on. You can't cut off my supply because all of my help come from the Lord. I'm like Abraham, keep what you got if you want to. You ain't going to cut off my supply. Because my supply is a steady stream. And what Philippians says is God shall supply all of my need according to his riches in heaven, not at bank first at the bank account at Pilgrim Grove, but according to his riches in. Even though I bank on earth, my money comes from heaven. My supply comes from heaven. And so he said, King, you keep what you got. I'm good. Take care of the men who helped you get back what you got back. And I'm explaining to you. Because he says, lest you say I made Abram rich. Boy, I tell you, some folks something serious. Especially church folk. I tell you, they tie everything to what they give and what they do. in the church. And the truth be told, these lights ain't on because they give, because they don't give. When they get mad, they leave and go home. That's what most church folk do. They leave, go home, they quit paying, and then really, in actuality, it's not your money that's doing anything because you don't give it. And if you give, you're not consistent. When you get mad, you start giving. God gonna take care of his own house. It is his house of bread. David said, I've never seen the righteous forsaken or seed begging.
Yeah, you're right.
Begging bread. See, I just got happy right there. Because he's a battle axe in the time of war. He's bread in a starving land. Water when you get thirsty. He's my all in all. I tell you, I've been young and now I'm getting old. And I've not yet seen the righteous forsaken. I've always had food on my table, shelter on my head, clothes on my back, because God will supply all of your needs according to his riches, not yours, not this church, but his riches in glory. I'm telling you, God will take care of you. Won't he do it? Won't he do it? Ain't he doing it? Ain't he take care of it? God was honored through Abraham's giving because Abraham trusted God. And he submitted to the fact that God was responsible. God was behind all of his success, all of his blessings. And Abram would not tie himself to King of Sodom by taking what was offered to him, because he did not want to dishonor God by taking when he knew God would take care of him, every head bowed and every eye closed. I'm telling you, God is going to take care of his own. And I know he will, because it's some of his own in this building right now. It's some of his own sitting in the seat you occupy. You can testify that God has been good to you. God has taken care of you. God has blessed you. And if you want to honor God, give. Be a cheerful giver. Give beyond what you should and what you can give. Because God has been good to you. Jesus Christ gave us the greatest gift when he gave his life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe in him shall not perish, but shall have life and life everlasting. If you're here today,